are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you once again for joining our show. We're in the stretch one, about 60 days for the most consequential election in American history. Today, joining me in my superstar panel, attorney Vanita Banks, a superstar. She has a master's in tax. She's a cybersecurity expert and a crack research analyst, and she keeps us abreast of all the latest trends. Then, of course, the famous Milton Grimes, who led the revolution in terms of police misconduct during this century. Now we're going to start off today. We had what is a typical tragedy in America almost every day, mass shooting. We saw mass shooting this week in Georgia, and I want to address that very briefly because we have the symptoms, and I want to explain why we have so many mass shootings in America. We have gun laws by Republican legislators that allows almost anyone to carry a gun, even high-capacity magazine, weapons of mass destruction. In fact, Georgia has some of the weakest, if not the weakest, gun legislation in the whole country. The legislature in Georgia passed a law and requiring colleges and universities to allow guns on campus in 2017 and 2022. It got to be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So now you want to have college students carrying guns without permits, without background. And the only thing Georgia did was repeal his citizen arrest law in 2021. But the state of Georgia still has the most dangerous shoot first law that allows a person in Georgia to kill another person in a public area, even when they could safely walk away from the danger. Now, here's their background. Do Georgia allow background check? No. Concealed carry permit? No. If you're a risk to law enforcement, no restriction. No shoot first law does not have a dangerous shoot first law in place. Secure storage of child access prevention required. Georgia doesn't require that, which was surprising me, Milton, because they charged the father with manslaughter, but they don't have a secure storage of child access prevention required in Georgia. And assault weapons allowed, consumer safety legislation allowed, ghost gun regulation allowed, high capacity magazine allowed in Georgia. It goes on, does not have a dangerous legal immunity law in place for gun manufacturers. So Georgia is like the wild, wild west of gun legislation. In other words, they have none. The only restriction they have in Georgia, the only restriction is that it does not allow prisoners and inmates and convicted felons to carry a gun. That's it. And so you wonder why we have mass shootings? Well, if you give everybody a gun without any background check, without any assessment to see whether or not that person go out and start killing people, really sad day. And that's how we started real quickly because Vanita had brought this up, and I thought I need to cover that very briefly because I'm sick of these mass shootings in America, just tired of it. That doubled under the Trump administration because of these likes. We have NRA pushing for unlimited access to guns. America is 3% of the world population, but yet we're 51% of private gun ownership. When we had the Olympic, I said jokingly, there's no way in the world that America can't win that contest, the shooting contest, Milton, Vanita, because we have all these trained shooters in America, more than everybody else in the world combined.
And this week, Attorney Lee, we saw another heinous, senseless mass shooting on school grounds, and nearly 50 people have been killed or injured in K through 12 shootings across the United States in 2024. And my question becomes, we keep saying enough is enough. And obviously prayers are just empty rhetoric. as we're watching, as we're witnessing these school shootings on almost a daily or weekly basis. J.D. Vance, the candidate for vice president, stated that it's sad that this type of gun violence has become normalized. Attorney Lee, Georgia law does not permit minors to own handguns, and it's illegal for an adult to intentionally or knowingly or recklessly sell a minor a handgun. But the law does not appear to be clear regarding the type of weapon that was used at the Appalachian High School this week. It was an AR platform rifle, a semi-automatic weapon. And the question is, and I think we know the answer, because the father has been indicted for murder as well in this case. How did a 14-year-old have access to a semi-automatic weapon, enter a school, kill 4 people, and injure 9?
Wow.
I
So
don't.
the father has been indicted on 4 charges of involuntary manslaughter and second-degree murder, and the 14-year-old has been charged with murder. And so this family, I did a little reading about the mother. It appears that she has a long rap sheet with respect to drug violations and damage to property. The question becomes whether or not the third parent in this nation will be convicted of a crime as a result of their child's slaughtering of students at school. We did see the Michigan couple, husband and wife. They were sentenced to at least 10 years in prison. And based on what I've read so far, this father could face up to 180 years in Georgia.
Well, there are many laws on, not many, there are laws on the books about responsibility for and liability for the person who is in authority, etc., in relationships. But I think it's a deeper, I think it's a social problem that we have here with our love of guns and wild, wild west mentality. And it's something deeper than what the law says and what the manufacturers are doing. We got more guns than people in this country. And we got to find an answer, I think, that deals with education and our social system, with our value system. You know, it's evident by what's happening that our respect for life seems to be less than in most other countries. So what do we do with that?
Well, Milton, Vanita, I tell you what I do. When I get clients coming to my office of these mass shootings, we start suing people. Because if the government is not going to regulate this misconduct, I think as lawyers, we have to take a much more aggressive approach. You know, the people that are behind this and everybody who's involved in the process, if they're not going to take steps to protect citizens, then I think that we have to be more proactive about this. And that's what we've been doing.
I think suing people may get that family, if the person is killed, some compensation, some money, but I'm saying that's just attacking that's not attacking the core of the problem. That's just a symbol of the problem. And you can sue people all day. It's not going to save lives of individuals in a house that don't give a doo-doo about a suit because they don't have anything to lose necessarily. And I don't think they think on that basis. Oh, I'm gonna lose my house, or I'm gonna lose my job, or even I'm gonna go to prison. And they don't think past something else. And I don't know what it is. Yes, I do. I know it's teaching values. It's teaching respect for human life. That's my speculation. I don't know for sure.
And our caller, Renee, has shared that in 2023, that there was an FBI investigation of this child. Certain statements were made in social media, and the family was questioned, and yet I'm hearing, and obviously all the facts aren't in yet, was that the father gifted this weapon to the son as a Christmas present.
That's terrible. That's terrible. Well, we got also listeners, our call-in numbers 833-653-3529, 833-653-3529. And let's take a quick caller. Imhotep, you had a comment today about the gun violence, sir.
Yes, I do. Good morning to the great people, Brother Nate, Attorney Banks and Grimes. It's a never-ending story. There was a movie come out years ago called The Never-Ending Story. And I love that movie. It's the never-ending story. And the rest of the world, people talk bad about social media, but social media is a gift and a curse. Because the way I look at social media is I learn a whole lot from how the rest of the world sees things, how the rest of the world operates. You get charts and information from the University of Australia or Sydney, or you get something from the University of South Africa, different schools and just American schools, which we should be looking at. And so they looked up the mass shootings, some people from Australia, because they've really been chiming in. The people from Australia have really been chiming in New Zealand, because I think the president of New Zealand banned assault weapons in, what was it, 16, I think. They had a mass shooting, and they immediately banned assault weapons, had a buyback where they gave $2,000, $1,500 a gun, bought them back, and eliminated all that. Australia, we know what happened when they had one. They eliminated, they haven't had any of these issues. But when you look at the rest of the world, and America claims to be the greatest country on the planet, because, see, this country just judges things on economics, which I don't understand you can do that when we got $32 trillion in debt, which Donald Trump added almost $9 trillion to. Society is more than just money. It's the culture, it's the morals, it's the ethics, it's the value system, it's the norms, it's the things that you live with. And having guns in this society is just a norm. What disturbed me even more, and I like your comments on this, maybe Attorney Banks, you keep your ear if Grimes and Attorney Lee been busy, but J.D. Vance said that school shootings is just a way of life here. This is what the vice presidential candidate said when he asked him about what to do. He said, well, they're just a way of life. We need to just get more security or more police in the schools. Or woo. The rest of the world is like, what the heck is that? If you look at comments from around Sweden, Norway, Finland, England, Australia, Saudi Arabia, Abu Dhabi, any of these places, Japan. Oh, they've been chiming into Japan. What do you mean it's a way of life? What do you mean? We've got a group of people who have been in charge so long that the negative consequences of our society have just been overrun. And since we see now that maybe there's a push the other way, you got 88 businessmen supporting Kamala, you got 200 others, you got all this money coming in. She said what she said the other day. She stood on it about banning assault weapons. The research showed from Clinton when he had the assault weapons ban from, from 94 to 2004, there were only, 7 mass shootings, I think, and 3 happened during the year of Columbine. So there's anecdotal evidence that does cut down mass shootings. But the father, Black people always get criticized because ain't no dads in the home and we don't have no parents. But yet the father was right there. The father pushed this ideology. And I'll leave you with this. They just arrested a kid here yesterday, you all, from Perry Meridian High School. He made threats online. Don't know what he said. But the Indiana State Police and the school police immediately arrested him. I'd like to know what the FBI had on this young man. Because once you make a threat to a school, I thought that's immediately arrestable. That he was investigated, but he wasn't arrested. I thought when you make any threat to a school or a school shooting, any type of situation like that, that's an arrestable offense. And we know how some people have privilege. But I'll take the comments off the air, and it's just got to stop. Thanks for taking my call.
Well, he said a mouthful, Vanita, Milton. You know, it's a sad day, and we're beginning to see a pattern. I was watching Morning Joe, and he said something that was very profound. He was saying that when you look at these mass shootings, who's doing these mass shootings? He said it's white males, and he went on to explain what his thought process. It was just very educational to hear his overview of this shooting process. But it escalated under the Trump presidency. So, you know, when he says tough on crime, never mind the fact they normalized that he's a convicted felon, got 34 felony conviction. And they've normalized this bad behavior. And so now we have children who's doing safety drills, hiding in closet at schools to prevent them from being murdered by lunatics. You know, what the solution? This is just a terrible problem that we have.
And it seems that the courts are more interested in protecting guns and gun ownership than protecting our children in their schoolrooms. This is just unacceptable. This does not happen anywhere else in the world. As Milton stated, there are more guns than people in America. And it should be just common sense that there should be reasonable gun laws in this nation. Background checks, red flags laws.
So is it because of the profit made from gun manufacturing that the collateral damage of school shootings is acceptable to the people who are making trillions of dollars off the manufacturing of weapons? It's like when what was the car that the Maverick, or the car that exploded from the back because of the gas tank, Nate?
Pinto.
Yeah. You know, do they recognize that, okay, in America, we're going to have these mass shootings, and seem as though that most of these shootings occur even in non-minority communities. And I'm not trying to be racist in this. I'm just saying my observation of it. But it seems as though it's a normal. So it's a normal from the making of a profit on such a profitable industry. I hate to look at it like that, but seems to be what it is.
Well, Milton, you're absolutely right, because Vanita contested the fact that in her neck of the wood up there in Illinois, they had this mass shooting over a holiday, and that was a really low crime city. Rarely did they have any murder. And the guy tried to murder everybody in the whole city. And then in Las Vegas at this concert, guy shoots from a hotel where he hit over 500 people with automatic weapons. I mean, you know, the point is that we have weapons that individuals have the ability to own and possess without any consequence or background check. And we don't have a procedure in place now that protects the public from lunatics. And I say that because you have to have some degree of mental deficiency, in my mind, to go out and just start randomly murdering people. It's an unnatural thing. We've normalized bad behavior. and we'll get to that in the next subject matter, but it's just very sad to see this occur over and over and over again. And then the Republicans say, well, that's just a way of life.
Totally unacceptable. And again, all the facts are not in, still being developed, but early indications are that last year, the FBI interviewed the father after the son had made violent threats via social media. And the father told those FBI agents that he had hunting guns, that the father had hunting guns, but they were secured, and that his son had no unsupervised access to them.
That's terrible.
And
Yeah,
then it just stated, Attorney Lee, Georgia has some of the weakest gun laws in the nation.
It's terrible. In the GOP, when Kyle Rittenhouse, the kid that murdered those people in Wisconsin, he goes out and they made this guy a hero for just killing people. He became a hero for killing people. And so the mentality is we've normalized aberrant behavior. And so now, even though it become normalized, people still die and people still hurt. And I just think that is morally wrong. And as a nation, we have to do better. Now, how do we do better? Get to our next topic, that is voting. We've seen a surge in African-American women registration, the most ever, which is great. We've got a candidate who's raised a lot of money, great. But we have a problem in the sense that we have an opponent running for president of the United States that's a convicted felon, 34 felony conviction, numerous criminal indictment, adjudicated to be a fraudster in California, New York, loses business license. A jury determined that he sexually assaulted a woman in a department store, and it goes on and on and on and on. And somehow, and then he does these press conference, or he does these things at event where he rambles and says stupid stuff, and it gets so ridiculous. Now he came up with a term called the weave or the wave or something. And so we've got a person that totally mentally unfit, morally corrupt, convicted felon, somehow is a serious candidate for president of the United States. And on top of that, they're running to become a dictator and to stay out of prison. And so, Vanita, that Project 125, more and more I look at that, the more devastating of a product that we're looking at in the future. We've seen the elimination of affirmative action, which we're going to talk about next week. We'll have Professor Brown back on the show next week. But right now, I'm concerned, like in our community, I don't see the enthusiasm yet that I want to see about voting and voter registration. And I don't know what's like in your community, but we're just not happening here. So we're going to try to change that by having our own voter registration here locally in India in a couple of weeks before the deadline hits.
Tell us about your plan, Attorney Lee, for a mass voter registration drive.
Well, what I'm doing is I've talked to Ryan Mears, and so we're going to get the local officials and we're going to put together some event, and I'll get with the civil rights group, try to get everybody involved and try to have a massive voter registration. The first thing you have to do is that you got to make sure everybody's registered to vote and then have a plan to vote before Election Day. But the second thing is that you got to make sure that everybody is on board to call their friends, their relatives, their neighbors to make sure they vote. And because the election this year is going to be close because we have such an anomaly in terms of the race. We have a prosecutor running against a convicted felon. Milton, we have a prosecutor running against a convicted felon. We've normalized this. Do you know how profound that is as a defense lawyer? You ever thought that your clients could ever be president of the United States? I mean, it's almost laughable.
Well, not quite. I don't know what to say about our situation here dealing with Donald Trump. You know, it's something, I guess, that we inherited or is due us because of the allowances and what we did when he was president. I mean, the man should have been checked and out of it then, but we've allowed him to continue on. I don't know what to say, you know.
Well, here's something important. They said that he did a great job running the economy. He had zero job growth. He's the only president that Herbert Hoover that lost jobs. They say he did well with the budget. Well, he generated 25% of the federal deficit. The stock market under the current administration is the highest it's been in American history. They've created 17 million jobs. They've had the lowest sustained unemployment almost in the history of America. And so things were going better in our country than anywhere else in the world. Yeah, we had an issue with inflation. It's been tough for people who are not making a lot of money to pay their bills. But we had this really bad pandemic that was managed the worst in American history, where people were dying every day. Everybody forget about this. It's almost like people have a blank slate and not realize that we had an idiot in the White House who thought he could cure COVID with bleach. And all of a sudden, he said it'd be done in a couple months, and then we had thousands of people dying. Got worse and worse, and it became normal. And so people all of a sudden have forgotten about the fact of everything he touched just was a rotten apple. It was just terrible.
It's very important that the focus at this time be on voter registration, to your point, Attorney Lee. And so in all of the organizations that I'm a member of or leader of, we're focused on voter registration at this point, and also focused on, because of the voter suppression that's occurring in many states across the country, that we're asking everyone to check your voter registration status, because you may believe that you have registered, but there are laws that are being passed that, for example, in Georgia, anybody can cancel, there's a quote, voter registration cancellation portal. And someone can go up on that portal and actually cancel someone's voter registration without their knowledge.
Wow.
Unacceptable. And so since 2020, there's been a slew of new laws and practices that purportedly are intended to, quote, protect against voter fraud. But as we know, and every court that has considered the issue has ruled that there was no voter fraud in the last election. So it's very important that all of our listeners, please check your voter registration status. You can go to vote.org is one of the places you can do that. And also I wanted to share, and we'll put it in the chat, that Black Voter Registration Day is November 13th. So think about, no, it can't be November, September 13th. Sorry about that, September 13th. So between now and September 13th, our actions should be focused on voter registration of our communities. And then National Voter Registration Day is September 17th. So two important dates to keep in mind. Also, early voting is going to begin in many states. Here in Illinois, it commenced on September 26th. So it's important that we mobilize, that we educate, that we inform, and that we focus on registration over the next several weeks.
You know, something is wrong though, Vanita and Nate. I believe that the Democrats would be the best representatives for our government, but I'm seeing more homelessness or unsheltered people in my neighborhood. Cost of food items have gone up significantly in my neighborhood. And I use those two examples to say that's what people are looking at. And that's what is concerning to me, that what is visible to the public does not speak well for the present government. And that's going to give Mr. Trump an edge from my community.
Well, what happened is that people forget about the fact that under his leadership, we were doing what is called shelter in place. During your lifetime, that's probably the only time that you had to stay at home. The government paid you to stay at home because he mismanaged the pandemic. And so what happened? We had the highest Black unemployment rate in the history of America under his leadership. The highest ever, went to almost like 17%. And so the net result was, in order to save people lives, don't forget about this, folks, the government gave everybody a check every week. Unless you had a stupid Republican governor, like in Indiana, you got $975 a week for a whole year to stay at home. The corollary to that would be to let people starve. So you had to make sure that people had the ability to live. We had rental assistance, we had food stamps. So we took care of the people in the country with special legislation based on a crisis that the idiot in the White House helped create. But that resulted in an increase in cost, inflation, because there was so much money, and the money emanated to the average citizen. See, people that don't have a lot of money, the poor people, they spend all their money. When they spend all their money, it causes a ripple effect of inflation. That's a corollary of people spending money. Rich people don't spend 100% of their money on their food, housing, and cars. Only people that don't have a lot of money, and that's why we have inflation. So, but inflation in the United States is lower than all the democratic countries in the whole world. And so what we have to focus on, in all honesty, is what Harris people are proposing. We got to increase the minimum wage. People can't live off these low wages. And so unless we address that issue, then it's going to become a relevant issue in the community, because we have to get laws passed to make sure everybody can have a chance to make a decent living. And that's what they're proposing to do. And what they're doing to support that, one of the things that Kamala Harris has proposed is giving a tax credit to small business of $50,000. So the government's going to give you financial assistance to start your business, $50,000 in a tax credit. Sort of like what we did during the pandemic. Our businesses, law firms, everybody else got money from the government. But then at the end of that, in 2021 and 2022, the government gave all the businesses ability to get tax credit for keeping your employees on staff and paying their salary in the form of a tax credit. It was a great thing, and everybody forgot about that. But people that kept up with this got significant tax credit for protecting your employees. Now we got a call on the line. Caller, you have a question for us today.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, who's speaking?
This is Guy.
Hey, Guy. Okay, what's your question or comment today, sir?
Well, just some observations about this current political situation. Isn't it amazing that the Republican candidate for president has not been sentenced yet, even though he's been convicted. And only in America, it seems to me, could this happen, because you have a person who tried to overthrow the government previously, in addition to his other dastardly deeds, and yet he's being accommodated at every turn. Only in America could this happen, I guess, and this is like a picture of where we are as a country. But the other thing is, look how many people who are unfortunately supporting him and continually to, particularly the radio, the right-wing radio commentators, continually support him and act like you're crazy if you don't support him. What do you think about all of this?
Well, I have learned from some of my Republican friends as to why, it was a hard truth. We've had some discussions because I represent Republican, Democrats, Independents. I've even represented some white supremacists in personal injury cases. So I have a good demographics of folks that my law firm represent. So I talked to one of my Republican friends, and I was advised that they support Trump because they think that he looks out for them. They think that women have made too much gain to the detriment of white males. They think that affirmative action is bad for them because it takes away jobs and ability for them to make more money. So it was based on the fact that they see in him somebody who will give them an advantage, and not realizing. My response to my friends is that, well, you tell those friends of yours, I want them to look at the statistics. It's very important. Look at the 100 wealthiest people in America. Just look at 100 wealthy people. If you take the top 5, they make more money than every Black person and minority in the whole freaking country. They have more wealth than every minority in the country. But what does this list have in common? Well, when you look at the list, it's white males, and the white women acquired their wealth through divorce or inheritance, like the Walton family or Jeff Bezos' wife. And so when you look at this list, you all of a sudden discovered that on the top 100, I think there was one African American, one. And so the net result is we're not your competitors. Our community do not have the wealth, and your community contain most of the wealth. And so you're attacking the wrong person. And so the point I'm making is that I think that whenever I have a chance to, I talk to my Republican friends about these issues. And I think it's important that we understand that we don't have the wealth in our community, so they're attacking the wrong person.
But how can they continually get away with this on a 24-hour-a-day basis? I mean, I've been in a position to listen to a lot of media or see a lot of media, but it's almost like a 24-hour barrage of these people putting their position forward, which is basically fraud that they're putting forth on the people. Yet they continually do it and get away with it.
Well, Attorney Banks pointed out something earlier, about voter protection, and the attempts to disenfranchise African America has a long and dark history in America, and I use that phrase for making a point. Back in the 1800s, the beginning of the Jim Crow laws was traced back to what happened in Louisiana. I think it was a Cruikshank case or something, where all these Black voters male voters were attempted to vote. They were murdered, and they got away with it. The government made a special rule that allows these people to kill these innocent men and have no consequence. Now, women weren't allowed to vote until we passed the 19th Amendment in, I think, 2019. So back in the 1800s, only men could vote, right? And so when this occurred, this voter suppression effort occurred, what happened next was the beginning of what we call the Jim Crow laws in the Black Code. So in America, we went back towards slavery based upon judicial interpretation of people's rights. We're seeing this go full circle now. First, they attacked women by taking out women's reproductive rights and women's freedom. Well, who's going to be next? And so that's why this election is probably the most consequential in American history, because now we have one political group with the Project 125 trying to turn back. And so they said, we're trying to, make America great again. Well, what are they talking about? They're talking about we had Jim Crow laws, we had the passage of the Black Code, we had slavery. Is that what they're talking about? Of course, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about make America great where everybody have a chance to be success or everybody have equal opportunity. That's not what they're saying. That makes sense?
Yeah, and the slogan should be "Make America Hate Again," because that's what they're doing, basically. Make America hate again. But it seems to be that there's an opportunity, in addition to the nuts and bolts that Attorney Banks is speaking of, that we have to do. But it seems to be it's also an opportunity to draw the distinctions of the inequities in the voting system, such as even though we have a felon convicted by a jury of his peers 100%, those people who know him best, even though we have that situation, we have a lot of former people that have been in prison that don't have the right to vote in certain states. I think it might be an opportunity to draw the distinction and try to correct that so that, every person that has served his time or whatever does get his rights to vote. That would be one concrete thing that might be able to come out of this situation.
Well, that's interesting you say that. Hey, Milton, that's an interesting point he made, because Trump could be voted down in Florida, and the governor of Florida was fighting for every convicted felon, which was a lot minority, couldn't vote. So now we got the guy running for president that's got 34 felony conviction.
But getting back to that phrase again mean that you respect and you give a lot of credence and desire for what was before, if you're going to do it again. And what was before was racism, Jim Crow, the mutilation and the killing of Black people, and it's not even coded. He's saying let's go back to what was, taking away civil rights, taking away equal opportunity for education that we didn't have before. That's what they're talking about going back to. Isn't that what that 2025 is about? So it's obvious what the plan is, and Ray Charles could see it, but for some reason,
Stevie Wonder too.
Okay, so
And I mentioned on earlier shows that in 2025, that was the first year that more minority babies were born in this country than white babies. And so there's just a lot of fear that minorities are going to take over this country.
right.
And so there's just this, we see the plan in Project 25. It's about power, control, and money. It's about
Mostly money.
tax cuts to the wealthy, right? And then it's all the rest of us. And so, for example, over 70 swing state officials, they are poised now to obstruct election certification. In Georgia, for example, they've announced a rule where they would require or enable county officials to conduct a, quote, reasonable inquiry before they can certify results. So
And
these election deniers, they have infiltrated these county boards across the country.
Right.
And we know, however, that refusing to certify an election is illegal. So I really feel what Guy is saying. I mean, we've just turned the law and what makes sense on its head. For all the reasons that you articulated, Attorney Lee, regarding the 34 felons and felonies and just the entire list that we would have a candidate that is running at this time, which was the reason why so many of us across the country were filled with this melancholy and depression, quite frankly, until President Biden stepped back and the vice president stepped up. And at that point, many of us across the country felt a renewed hope.
Yeah. And this is not just talk. I read an article a couple of months ago in the paper that this somewhere in the outskirts of Sacramento, in the desert area, there were 200 and some people at a little motel, but the purpose of it was to train the mega people on how to deal with the election, not to accept it, how to throw a wrench into the wheel spokes, so to speak, and make sure that this election doesn't get certified. They didn't care, and they're training them to just oppose the results, whether it's good or bad. I don't understand that, but it's training people around the country in little pockets of this country with hundreds of people on what to do at the election day to fight the results. So it's not just talk.
The Republican National Committee and the North Carolina Republican Party, they've sued the North Carolina Board of Elections to remove or purge more than 225,000 registered voters from the rolls. The NAACP has moved to intervene in the action, in this case, but we're seeing this rampant voter suppression tactics across the nation, and particularly in swing states. And our caller, Renee, has made a great point in the chat that if you live in Texas or Georgia and other states, you may need to check your the status of your voter registration on a weekly or daily basis up to the election, because that's how critical this is. I also find it very, very, very telling that Dick Cheney would be quoted as follows: in our 248-year history, there has never been an individual who is a greater threat to our republic than Donald Trump, who is endorsing and will be voting for Vice President Kamala Harris on Election Day as his daughter, Liz Cheney.
That's stunning. One of the most conservative Republican vice president in the history of our country. You know, it's incredible that Dick Cheney, I mean, for him to even think about voting for a Democrat must have been like being hit by a baseball bat, Milton, Vanita. Dick Cheney? And that's shocking. I don't know, for any of those Republicans out there who think that it's a good idea to vote for a convicted felon, a person that is a business fraudster, rapes a woman in an apartment store, according to the judge, defrauds students, loses a business license, and it goes on and on and on and on. Is a good idea, you've lost your freaking mind. This is crazy stuff. No person would ever even stay in a presidential race with that type of baggage.
Nate, we've had Mussolinis, we've had Hitlers, we've had a lot of leaders who he's idolizing and whom he's using their platform and their format on how to get to leadership. So it's not so insane, my brother. It can happen.
He's using a documented playbook,
Yeah.
as you stated, Milton.
Yes, Nate, it ain't. I'm not talking to you. I'm just saying it ain't impossible, y'all.
And 25 to 40% of the nation are buying in to those philosophies.
And one other thing too, I need to point out that we have some really educated guests and callers on our show. And Imhotep said something that's really important. One of the chief legislative initiatives by Trump is to impose tariffs on Chinese goods. Now, a long time ago, back in 2000, Walmart was taking in $1 billion a week in goods from China at lower cost goods. But tariffs is not a fee against a foreign country. A tariff, folks, is a fee on you. So when you go to the store, if you were going to buy, say, a shirt or blouse that was made in China, and say the blouse costs $10, well, the 10% tariffs make your blouse cost you $11.40 plus tax. So in other words, the tariffs is a tax on you, not on China, is a tax on the good that you pay for. And most people don't understand that. Let's make something clear. So his taxes is to give tax relief to billionaires and millionaires and to impose that tax upon the typical working American who live from paycheck to paycheck. And that's his idea of a tax. I mean, it's so abnormal for people to support a person who everything he says is against their own interests. It's just insane what he's doing. And
that's not African-American communities, that's communities across our nation.
Right. I read an older book once some years ago, and it talked about the founding fathers and the two political parties, and they had a meeting, and they said, well, we must be conscious of the third party, and that's the rich.
Mm-hmm.
That's the rich. And the rich has a lot of influence on the results of our election.
Wow.
And we've seen that trickle down just does not work.
That's the third.
Well,
he's addressing the rich.
Absolutely.
Well, closing comment, we have a couple minutes. Vanita, what do the people in your neck of the woods got to do to turn this thing around to make sure that we don't go backwards?
We have to meet everybody where they are. We have to talk to all of our constituencies. We've got to knock on doors. We've got to post cards. We've got to talk to our neighbors. We've got to ensure that everyone is registered, number one. And then number two, once we make sure that happens, then we've got to mobilize and make sure that everybody gets to the polls on election day. And so that's what we're doing here. We're all focused on getting out the vote, with right now the priority being making sure that everybody is registered and knows what their voter registration status is.
I think we got to step up our game a little bit, Nate, and do more than we've ever done before. Talk to people, get out the vote, even help carry people to the vote, or make sure they get their vote in time But like Vanita just brought out, in some of these states, you got to check whether you still registered to vote up until the day of the voting. It's a lot of work to be done because this is no joke. This is our life.
I'm echoing what both councils said, but more importantly, they said something very profound. Please, on Monday, check your voter registration. First thing, I want you to make sure that you're properly registered. If not, make sure you get registered. Second thing is that all your relatives that are in nursing homes and hospitals and shut in, make sure they're registered. But the most important thing is that we mostly, in almost all the states, you have write-in votes whereby you could get a ballot and vote by mail. So the folks that can't get the vote, I want everybody to make arrangement to help those folks navigate this troubled water and be able to vote. It's all hands on deck, whether, like echo what Vanita said, whether you have to knock on doors, you have to call, but we need 110% effort to make sure that we get everybody in our community to vote. Remember, this is a critical time in American history. We've seen what happened after the Civil War, how we reverted back to the Jim Crow laws and the Black Code. We have an attack on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have elimination of affirmative action, and we're going to talk about that next week as to the harmful effect on our community. So stay tuned for next week. We'll have the professor back again. We're going to talk about the destruction of the affirmative action DEI and what effect is now having on each of us, our families in this community. So thank you, everyone. And we look forward to talking to you next Saturday morning. Until then, may God bless and keep you. And don't forget, check your voter registration. Make sure you register to vote. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed day.
Bye, y'all.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.